Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Just a quick note to start things off. Today's webinar is being recorded, so you'll be getting a link to this after the event is complete. So please feel free to revisit the content, share it with colleagues. In today's webinar, we are going to be looking at sales talent productivity risks and remedies for this year. So specifically, we're going to be looking at headcount expectations, onboarding programs, and also employee burnout and how folks can respond to that. My name is Crystal Rath-González. I'm a director here with SBI. That means I work with our clients on go-to-market strategy and execution engagements. As we talk through each of these three topics, I'll be sharing a little bit about what SBI is actually seeing in practice. Chris here is with our research team. I'll let him introduce himself and give a little background on the survey and some of the key takeaways.
Thanks, Crystal. My name's Chris Brown. I'm a senior researcher with the research team here at SBI. Part of what we do is ask big questions and then seek meaningful answers in the go-to-market space. So we're really excited to bring this survey out and to talk about some of the findings that we found.
Great.
Just a little bit of background about the survey. We periodically survey CEOs and other C-level executives in order to get a pulse on their take on the market, as well as sort of what's keeping them up at night. So a little bit about the survey and a little bit of background for this particular survey. Of the 102 CEOs and other executives that we spoke with, 44% of them were CEOs, the rest were other C-suite. That means that there were people who are CMOs, CROs, that sort of thing. Looking at industry, half of our responses were from software and telecom, with another sizable component coming from various technologies as well as business services. Looking at ownership structure, it's something that we look at pretty frequently, the difference between public companies and those that are sponsored by private equity. They tend to have a little bit different time horizon in terms of their decision making, so that's important for us to call out here. 61% of the companies that we polled were private equity sponsored, with the remainder being public. And finally, looking at size of company in terms of revenue, over about 2/3 of them were $1 billion or less in terms of annual revenue. Some top-line takeaways for today's study. Number one, planned hiring will be insufficient to cover open territory needs. Number two, onboarding is insufficient to rapidly ramp new hires to productivity. And number three, identifying sources of employee burnout is really necessary for sustained growth over time.
Great. So those are the highlights. We are going to jump into headcount first. So, Chris, what did we hear in the survey?
Like I mentioned, planned headcount is going to be insufficient to adequately cover territories. So let's dive into the data a little bit there. If we look on the left-hand side of this slide, on the top left, we see headcount expectations relative to 2022. So looking forward into 2023, how do we expect that to vary from 2022? 2/3 of respondents, fully 67% of leaders, plan to add no additional headcount or less than 15%. Moving down to the bottom left, we see open sales territories as we move into 2023. 45% of leaders identified that 15% or more of their territories are currently uncovered. So if we combine those two, on a one-to-one basis, on average, new headcount won't be sufficient. The second finding that we take away from that is that new hires will be spread more thin than their predecessors. So combining those two insights, additional productivity will be necessary in order to just maintain the status quo. And additional growth beyond that will require that much more incremental productivity gain.
And I know that there have been a lot of tech layoffs in the headlines, but the reality is that the labor market is still tight. And some of the open headcount that we're seeing among our clients is something that they've been carrying over from last year. And so as firms tighten their spending in anticipation of this potential recession, we're seeing tensions like this where territories are being left open. And so, as Chris said, what that means is that organizations need to drive productivity gains. So, Chris, what are some of the ways that companies can do this?
Well, there are a number of ways, but I want to call out three things in particular. Number one, account segmentation. That really helps us to organize our white space and identify our white space, as well as identify account potential and prioritize which accounts are the accounts that we want to be going after. Number two, territory design. Territory design lets us align our sellers with their various patches, whether it's geographic or by any other metric that you want to go after. And that helps us to really get the most bang for our buck. And number three is utilizing channel partners. That helps us to extend our reach while not having to increase our in-house headcount.
And it's important to think of these things in concert. So at the end of last year, we were working with a client that was looking to reorganize their sales team and really their go-to-market model from one that was offering a collection of point solutions to a platform. Pretty substantial reorganization. And so we helped them with a variety of things, two out of these three, but we started with account segmentation. Account seg is the fact base. Who are your best customers and how much can they spend? And that can inform both territory design and the channel strategy. And your channel strategy really can and should be more nuanced than just giving partners the bottom of the pyramid. Having that fact base really enables you to both create balanced territories that on the one hand really maximizes the productivity of your internal sales team, and then on the other, create an attractive channel program for your partners that gives them access to valuable customers. And so just that fact base for this decision making, that account segmentation is just fundamental to realizing the productivity gains that companies need in order to be able to do more with less. So next topic here is around onboarding programs and how do we set our people up for success? So Chris, what is it that we saw in the survey?
So we asked executives to agree or disagree with the statement of we are highly productive at ramping new sales talent. And you can see the results there on the top left. Only 14% of leaders agree that onboarding is highly productive in their companies. That's only 1 in 7. If you look at the bottom left, we see expected corporate training budgets, again, looking forward into 2023 relative to 2022. And we found that 60% of leaders have plans to either reduce or make no changes to their training budgets. This should be a big red flag and a big blinking light to draw attention. Because a lack of onboarding, particularly a successful onboarding, it reduces symmetry across the sales team, meaning you don't have everyone playing from the same deck of cards. So that can create problems with our customer experiences, people getting different levels of care and different plays being run, as well as creating difficulty in diagnosing in a post-mortem. So in our win-loss analyses, if we're not always playing the same plays in the same way, we really run into issues being able to diagnose root cause as to why we won or didn't win.
And this last point here around ramp time, that is a key lever for improving productivity and one that onboarding programs can really have an impact on. And so what are some of the elements of a strong onboarding program?
There are 4 key elements that I want to highlight, and they're all rooted in practical application, and they have clear specific metrics. The first one is a seller competency and proficiencies analysis. That helps us to understand what are our sellers good at and what do we need to improve. The second one is a 30, 60, 90-day plan. That creates very defined and achievable timeframes in order to see learnings, in order to create that environment of learning, but also in order to not have just long onboarding and long processes that never seem to come to an end. The third one ties in with the 2 above of weekly onboarding activities. So that helps us to create very incremental changes in our behaviors and in our learnings without having long periods of nothing and then a big bang right at the end. Another note on that is that we've seen good success in certification programs that help internally signal that a person has achieved learning in topic X, Y, or Z sufficient with level or above level. And then the last one is really a way to work across all of these different activities is the learn, watch, do, reinforce framework.
So another client example I can share that illustrates a lot of these elements. We were working with an enterprise software company that was hiring 50 sellers, so that's 15% of their force. But the onboarding program was dated. So similar to my previous example, the company really wanted to move reps to value-based selling. So in support of more transformational deals, less of a focus on selling on features. And so there were a couple different profiles for these reps that they were hiring. So experienced enterprise sellers with limited subject matter expertise and deep subject matter experts with limited enterprise sales experience. Both of these profiles historically were successful, but as you can imagine, very different onboarding needs. And just as a side note, this combination of profiles is actually pretty common among our clients. And so this kind of sort of bifurcated needs in onboarding also fairly common. So what did we do? We created learning paths for each. And so this included a combination of virtual classroom, in-person academy, and then we pulled in the managers for those weekly onboarding activities. And so what we did is we created coaching questions, we created checklists that they could use in their weekly coaching sessions with these new reps. And so we helped this client with a variety of initiatives over the year, account seg, territory comp quota, a variety of things. But those combination of efforts helped the company achieve a record new ARR growth. It was more than 30% that year. And so really understanding what your hires need, offering them the right level of support, and then tracking the results is the way to ensure that you have an effective onboarding program that supports these goals of driving productivity among your sellers. Now, the next topic, burnout. So as we talk about increasing productivity, gaps in territories, etc., burnout is a concern. And so what are leaders seeing, Chris?
So again, we asked another question for agreement. This one was, an increase in employee burnout is preventing your go-to-market staff and leaders from performing at their highest potential. We had over 20%, we had 21% actually, of our respondents agree with that. And as we kind of tried to dial down into it, we pointed out potential causes of sales burnout. And as you can see on the bottom left, none of them really leap off the page. That no clear cause of burnout is a tremendous problem. Without identification, burnout can remain very pervasive. It can just kind of linger and stick around. That is especially important to remember as new hires are going to be spread more thin and asked to do more than their predecessors were. So we recommend that managers dive into their team's specific needs, because a lack of across-the-board context or a lack of across-the-board reasoning makes for a very context-specific burnout situation that managers are really well situated to address.
And this, once again, is the value of a coaching program, something established where managers are having regular touch points with their reps, can help surface some of these issues and help the organization respond. And so, Chris, let's talk a little bit about what makes for a good coaching program.
Absolutely. So we have 4 key aspects that I want to touch on that we see in all of our good coaching programs. Number 1 is a firm methodology that has everyone playing across the organization from a known playbook. It has different phases in the journey as someone continues to grow, and it also helps to outline pitfalls and help be an effective manager, an effective coach. The second one is having a cadence and sticking to it, whether it's bi-weekly, weekly, and in some cases daily necessary. particularly as you're beginning in a new role or ramping into a new organization. Those daily touch points can be really important. But the underlying value here is having a cadence and sticking to it. The third one is session details, knowing going into a meeting what we want to talk about, whether it's through an agenda setting process or knowing that we have our quarterly goals or our monthly goals, things that both the coach and the coachee know that we're going to talk about in a given session. And the last one is a focus on skills development. This helps to guide behavior and come back to your true North Star, if you will, so that we can focus on the necessary steps in order to see that growth.
Yeah, it's important to give your coaching program some structure. And so I've worked with clients that have established coaching relationships between reps and their managers, but no additional guidance for what that coaching should look like. And what inevitably happens is that managers take very different approaches. That means that employees are having very different experiences. And as a leader, you are likely getting different results from those different approaches. And so a methodology, a guidance for what to cover in those sessions, and plans for how those reps are going to improve their skill set, all of that is incredibly important. And this is also something that can really help the organization develop its people leaders. It's not uncommon for organizations to really underappreciate, underinvest in training its people leaders. This can offer a kind of guidance for your managers to ensure that they know how it is that they need to support their reps. There's an established approach to do that. On this list here, the one on the end here, skill development, starting with a talent assessment can be very helpful in understanding your baseline in order to know how it is that you're supposed to support individual reps. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Absolutely, Crystal. And you're spot on. Talent assessments help us to understand where we are. It helps to create a baseline. So the first step in a quality talent assessment that uses data to help inform decisions and those learning plans is to define what the roles are and what the competencies are for those roles. If you don't define something, you can't work toward it. So it's very important to have very clear descriptions in order to successfully lay out what is necessary. The second step is to create a behavior-based assessment. This lets us understand, in a given scenario, how's an employee behaving? Are they doing the right things? Are they doing things that can be improved upon? Or do they just really need ground-up coaching? Behavior-based scenarios help us to understand those. But the third step is to use that data, but then enrich it through a 360 survey. 360-degree surveys help us look above, below, and next to the employees to get more context around their behaviors, around their competencies, and their fit within a given role. And then lastly, we synthesize and wrap all this up to be able to identify with additional facts, such as historical win rates or ASP or whatever historical color may be necessary in that given role. We bring all of that together to come up with that plan for whether it's skills or context or whatever that individual needs to be their most successful participant in the organization.
And to that last point, these talent assessments are something that should be presented to the managers. So managers should receive the results for each of their coachees. They need to be trained on how it is that they should interpret those results, and then offered guidance on how to talk to their reps about it. How to identify strengths, areas of opportunity, work together with their reps in order to develop that skill development plan. Generally, we ask folks to focus on 2 or 3 things in a quarter. So they get the results, they decide with the rep what those things should be, and together they make a plan so that they can tackle those things. That gives the managers a fact base in order to guide how it is that they're going to coach the reps. And it also means that the reps are invested in the relationship with the manager. They're working together towards common goals. And so this talent assessment, once again, fact-based is incredibly important foundation in order for organizations to be able to achieve their productivity goals. And so we have reached the end of our webinar. So we're going to go over these key takeaways again and connect them to some of the things that that you can do to achieve them. So, Chris, would you like to talk through these?
Absolutely. So, remembering back to the beginning of our time together, the first topic that we talked about is how planned hiring is looking to be insufficient to cover territories that are currently open. Possible remedies for that include account segmentation, territory design, and utilizing channel partners. The second thing we talked about is onboarding looks to be insufficient to rapidly ramp new hires. We highlighted the 4 pillars of a successful onboarding plan to help remediate that issue. And lastly, the third topic we talked about is identifying sources of employee burnout and how that's necessary for sustained growth of your organization. A coaching program as well as a talent assessment to create that fact base are 2 ways that we can help to tackle that issue.
Great. And so, folks, the full report behind this webinar is available to all SBI Pro subscribers. You can feel free to reach out to me, to Chris, to put you in touch with a go-to-market consultant if you need help accessing that report. So feel free to email us here, connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd be very happy to hear from you. And then lastly, I mentioned earlier that you'll be getting a recording of today's session in the next day or so, and the slides shortly afterwards. So thanks again so much for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.